Chapter 3. A black armored warrior stood in the arena, but he did not stand alone. "I need to be sure I can do this," Ainz told himself. "Just a low-level goblin, my lord?" Cocytus asked and hissed out freezing air before he used the scroll. "Yes, I need to do more experiments," Ainz answered, though he didn't reveal the nature of what he wanted to learn. He heard the sound of the heatless blue flames consuming the parchment, and then in front of him stood a summoned monster. The goblin had only a moment of self-awareness before the massive blade cleaved it in twain. The sickening sound of flesh and a cry of pain carried around the arena. The stumps of arms pulled it along, spurting blood and dragging bloody intestines behind it. Ainz stepped back, disgust and horror ran through him. "It's alive?" he realized as the pitiable summon stared up through hopeless eyes. The question was only half formed on its lips. "Why? Why did you call me up? What did I do wrong?" It wanted to ask, the word died on its lips when the sword pierced the brain and ended the pain of the summon. Weak in the knees, Ainz fell to the corpse and vomited against his mask. The acidic bile stained the inside as he truly shed blood for the first time in his life. "That will stay with me." Ainz had the grim thought. The all-too-human face, begging to understand before it died, was already gone. The summon vanished into the ether as the magic dissipated. With his back to Cocytus, Ainz felt comfortable enough, and desperate enough, to raise the faceplate, remove the mask beneath, and briefly wipe it in the sand. "Blood got into my helmet," Ainz said when he heard Cocytus take a step forward. It was enough to stop the guardian in his tracks when Ainz added, "Prepare another scroll, something more powerful this time, a werewolf." Cocytus began sorting through scrolls while Ainz frantically wiped the vomit from the mask and then affixed it back to his face and closed the helmet over it. "I'm ready," Ainz said, and listened as the scroll burned up. His heart beat madly as guilt over the brutal killing ran through him. It may have been just a summon, but its pain was real enough. No more of that. Unless Ainz was distracted by his thoughts, but at the moment the werewolf rushed him, those thoughts vanished. His body moved almost on its own. He easily leapt over the dark-furred beast, its hot breath wafting to him. Ainz could almost hear the sound of dripping saliva falling to the sands of the arena. Those levels put into warrior classes are very effective. When he was upside down as he flipped past the arm of the monster, he swung his sword and severed the arm at the elbow. The werewolf went down, but only for a moment as it went into a berserker rage. It charged with snapping jaws clapping shut, just shy of Ainz's face. He danced back, testing his reflexes and fending off the sharp claws of the remaining hand. "Yes, this is amazing, this body is wonderful," he thought while he toyed with the rage-filled monster that dripped blood in the sand as it moved after him, kicking up clouds behind it in its desperate effort to chase him down. "I was never this fit in my own world. And this also makes up for having lost my undead characteristics fairly well." He contemplated this just before raising his sword up, and with one firm twisting slash, bringing it down across the monster's body and splitting it from right shoulder to left hip. The two halves split and toppled, the jaw snapping hopelessly into the sand, until the beast died and vanished. As soon as it was gone, Ainz checked his exp totals. The goblin gave me 2 exp, the werewolf gave me 20, more importantly I now know I can grind against summoned monsters. That definitely isn't from the game. They stopped that in the first patch when magic casters power leveled themselves and their guilds rather than explore or do quests. Cocytus watched his warrior-clad lord stand with the sword tip buried in the sands, resting his hands on the pommel. The guardian reveled in the admiration of his master's display. "Is there anything my lord cannot do? Would you like another, my lord?" Just about to say yes, but request something stronger, Ainz saw a trio of other guardians entering the arena. Albedo, Shiltir, and Aura. "There'd be nothing but sour old milk in those balloons on your chest, you gorilla. Someone like you is just not fit to be Lord Ainz's first wife." Shiltir spat the words out, but Albedo did not yet rise to the bait. "My balloons are at least inflated. I don't have to stuff my bra to pretend I have them. I thought your defense was high, but it seems those mosquito bites on your chest would make that assumption of mine false. Why, without stuffing up top, you would be flatter than mare." Albedo cackled and put a hand to her chest like she wanted to emphasize its size. Shiltir, of course, could only fume in rage. "You bitch, that food display you put up there isn't even fit for a human, let alone the glorious sign of our Lord." Shaltir snarled, and that got under Albedo's skin. Ainz suppressed the wince, but stopped in mid-step before he approached them. Scary women. I'd be lying if I said I didn't at least enjoy their notice, but his trail of thought cut off when Albedo completely lost her temper at the last insult and began bellowing a stream of invectives at the diminutive guardian. Shaltir was one of the strongest in Nazarick, though you wouldn't have known it by looking at her. A bell-shaped Victorian dress of black and white that hung down to her ankles, a delicate-looking black parasol, and a childish face that made her appear to be about age 14. She carried herself erect and with perfect poise despite her argument with the guardian overseer, and her voice, when not yelling, was as delicate-sounding as her face was looking. She took the insult with a cocky little smile with her lip upturned on one side and continued her stately walk as they drew closer to their master. But they are a bit much, no matter how beautiful. The pair had no way of knowing how the insult, and how it was received, cut into Ainz and set him ever more resolutely into his decision to keep his secret from them, and while they bickered, he chose to address Aura. Aura knelt immediately when she came close while the pair hung back to fight over their love rivalry over their master, and Ainz tried to distract himself from the memory of Shaltir's whispered words from before, "Your bones must be divine." The necrophilia fetish was a bit much even when he was undead. Now that he was human, it was even worse. Did Pererencino just copy and paste the fetish wiki into her backstory? He wondered, and immediately thought, probably so. Then he came back to his senses as Aura began to speak. "Forgive me, my lord, but they have been at it all morning." "Have they? Well, it's to be expected." Ainz played it off as best he could and let out an exasperated sigh. "Just keep up the act. You were already pretending to be an all-knowing lord, now just add not human on top of that. Regardless," he added, "tell me what you found." "My lord, we searched everywhere we could for several days, and found no evidence of any supreme beings. Though for terrain we found a large forest, a large lake at the foothills of the mountain range, and some very interesting animals, which I hope you will permit me to gather someday." Aura gave a glowing smile and her tanned ears twitched. "She is still a child, and a lovely, charming girl." Ainz laughed and reached out to pat her head. She flushed rosy at her cheeks and squeezed her eyes shut. "Of course, Aura, once we're sure of the lay of the land, I will let you capture some rare monsters if that is what you want. How could I refuse the child of my dear Lady Bukabakushagama?" His billowing, enthusiastic voice as he indulged the wishes of a girl he saw as the child of a deeply cherished friend, and almost more? Maybe? If I had Ainz cut off his own line of thought as it crashed down on him in an instant. Without the game, without his friends, without his old life and all its concerns obscuring his vision, Bukabakushagama's winsome tease took on a new life and a new perspective. Or maybe it's my intelligence stat or luck stat or something else telling me what I was too dense to recognize before. He crouched down and pulled Aura into his arms. "Of course," he said, doing his best to disguise what he really felt and failing miserably. "Lord Ainz is hugging me. Lord Ainz is hugging me. The Supreme Being, the ruler of Nazarick. The one who stayed is hugging me." Aura panicked at first, but then a moment later her sudden shock was replaced by the happiest moment of her life. Her heart sang and her arms rushed around the armored body as much as her little limbs could manage it. "You'll have the very best life I can give you, and all the beasts you can tame," Ainz said with the deepest sincerity, and the noise of arguing from the two guardians ground to a screeching halt when they saw the sudden affection of their master for the dark elf girl. Ainz swallowed the lump in his throat over the opportunity he didn't realize he'd lost until that moment, and the opportunity presented to him now to look after the children of his companions. He glanced up to see the other guardians staring open-mouthed and with quivering around their eyes as both Shaltir and Albedo tried to determine if they had a new and unexpected rival or not. "Ainz Summer is the best. The very, very best." Aura thought and squeezed hard enough that ordinary armor would have been crushed in her grip. When Ainz began to relax his embrace, Aura did the same, though her lips formed a little pout when he stood up. "Go on, finish what you were saying, Aura," Ainz said while trying very hard not to look at the two guardians that had fallen to silence over his sudden display of affection for the little dark elf. "So we haven't found anyone worth mentioning, not even any lesser beings except for ones who are part of this new world. We did find some natives and there is a village of lizard people not far away, but otherwise nothing but empty land, wilderness, beasts, and monsters." "I see. We'll continue to monitor the situation, Set some of your stronger and more intelligent beasts to patrolling the area covertly until we are completely concealed." "Yes, of course, Lord Ines," Aura said with excitement, the blush still on her face. She looked up at him with a little biting motion on her lower lip. "Do you need something else, Aura?" Ines asked when she didn't say anything else. "It's just, can I hug you again, my lord?" "That was nice." Aura grinned sheepishly, and Ines crouched and opened his arms. She dove into them and squeezed again, until Ines's grip began to slacken and he stood again. "Thank you, my lord," she shouted and skipped away more than happy with the best reward she could imagine at the time. "Now, what, Albedo, Shiltir, can I do for you?" Ines asked and reflexively picked up the sword he left buried a quarter way up its length into the arena sands. He propped it up on his shoulder, and Albedo looked down at Shiltir with the same intense, steady-eyed gaze that Shiltir gave when looking up into the eyes of her rival in love. Before, Ines swore he was seeing a battle among women, but now it seemed, he was seeing a truce among the same. The two guardians spoke in one voice. "Can we have hugs too?" the pair exclaimed and put on the same pouty face Aura wore a moment ago, right down to biting their lower lips and gazing up into his eyes. A piece of his heart cracked, and in spite of the danger of possible discovery, however remote it might have been, Ines answered by sheathing his blade, opening his arms, and saying, "Yes." The squee noise of excitement as they rushed toward him, kicking up a flurry of arena sand behind their heels, made the risk worthwhile as far as Ines was concerned. Chapter 4. "My lord." Sabos folded a hand over his chest and leaned forward in a formal half-bow. At his back, the Pleiades battle-maids curtsied while they stood upon the arena sands before their lord. Nearby a jealous Shiltir and Albedo stood watching, equal parts euphoric from their chance to embrace their lord, and fuming that they would not get to go with him. "I am venturing out into the world myself, and I need one of you to accompany me," Ines said with a sweeping gaze from within his helmet. Gasps came from the maids and they snapped their eyes up instinctually to look at the concealed face. While CZ was difficult to read, her constantly neutral face is beautiful, but definitely not human enough. A disguise could fix that, but still, even if I could, her manner is such that few humans would feel comfortable with her. Rest assured, even if you are not chosen today, that isn't a reflection of any failure in yourself, only that your design makes you better for a different task, and when I call on you for it, I will need you to give your all. Ines spoke as lovingly as he could to the array of beautiful battle maids, and though some pouted a little, they were all quick to answer. "Of course, my lord." Or some variant of whatever you choose will of course be correct. "First, know that you will be venturing among humans. If you have a special hatred for their kind, please step out of line now," Ines said, and then wondered, should I have made that an order? No. Yes, I should have, but it's difficult to just order around my friend's children. Nabril Gamma and Solution Epsilon immediately stepped backward. "Next, because I am venturing among a mostly human society, you must be as capable of blending in as possible. If you lack, or your creator did not give you the means to blend in, please step out of line now." Ines narrowed the field again. CZ 2128 Delta and Entrama Vassilis Zeta took one step backward. Only Uri Alpha and Lupus Regina Beta remained. Ines looked over the remaining pair who stood with heads demurely bowed at Sabos's right and left side, their hands delicately folded in front of their waists. He tried to recall their settings. Didn't her creator call her the smiling sadist or something? Ines asked himself. And didn't Uri Alpha's creator make her into a serious workaholic? Both are drawbacks, but the former seemed more potentially problematic. Ines pointed to Lupus Regina. "Step forward, Lupus Regina. I seem to recall you enjoy the suffering of humans. This sounds the same as disliking them. Or am I wrong? You aren't hiding your hatred so that you can accompany me, are you?" Lupus Regina shivered at the almost accusation of dishonesty. She shook her head with wild denial. "My lord, I would never." She spoke so fast it was all one word and her eyes filled with tears. "My creator designed me to enjoy the suffering of my friends, regardless of whether they're human or not. The more I like them, the more I like their suffering. But I don't especially hate humans or anyone else. I promise." She slapped her hands together with fingers interlocked and held them up level with her chest as if in prayer. "Please, believe me, my lord, I would never lie to you." So he gave her a twisted personality. Ines mused and fought the shiver by turning his eye to Uri Alpha. He then yanked his eyes back to Lupus Regina as a thought occurred to him. I really didn't mean to make her cry. Great, now I feel terrible. I believe you, Ainz said, but does that mean you would be more eager and more readily be comfortable making friends with them? Like she wanted to make up for her twisted personality, she nodded with the same vigor she'd used when denying the earlier question. Yes, my lord. Her obvious eagerness made her once again string the words together as if they were all one. No. Not a decision. No. 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 No matter what I do, one of them will be hurt, and I don't want that. But I have to pick someone. I should have just chosen away from them and just sent for whoever I wanted later, but I needed a distraction from those two. He cast a side eye toward Albedo and Shiltier. I'm a terrible boss and a terrible father. A depression washed over his body as he looked at Yuri Alpha. Yuri Alpha? Ainz asked, who do you believe is better suited to accompany me on this expedition? Lupus Regina Beta, my lord. Her personality is twisted. She pushed up her glasses when the red-headed maid looked over at her sister and stuck out her tongue, but she is friendly, outgoing, and is a capable cleric. Her ability to heal may be very helpful in your travels. Does she know? Alarm chased away the brief depression, and then he stopped that line of thinking cold. No, I'll be among humans. It's a reasonable thought. Very well, Lupus Regina, you will accompany me. Gather traveling gear and meet me here in 1 hour. Ainz ordered. When they were all out of sight, he could swear he heard an almost howl like Yahoo-oo from the withdrawing red-headed beauty. So this is Eranthal, Ainz muttered when he saw it appear in the distance. How strange. I've seen pictures of medieval European fortresses from the old days, and these look a lot like they did. But also different, or maybe it's just me, it just looked so real. It was a little unnerving in a way, Ainz thought with goosebumps on his skin as they drew ever closer. The soldiers on the walls wore cheap half-plates of steel and carried steel halberds at an angle across their bodies. There was a double gate which controlled entry where similarly equipped soldiers checked goods and monitored entry. Ainz saw no one turned away, and quickly concluded it was a mere formality. It doesn't look like much, huh, my lord? Lupus Regina asked. Rather than her usual oversized weapon, she carried an enchanted mace which hung from her side. Her traveling clothing was a subdued green and brown, but of excellent quality. Ainz looked down at her from where he walked at her side. No, it doesn't. He admitted, but please be polite, and while we are like this, he tapped his armor and pointed to her traveling clothing. Do not refer to me as my lord or Lord Ainz or sir or sire or in any way treat me as a superior. I am the adventurer Moman and you are simply... He stopped. Wait, I didn't come up with a name for her. Shit. He swore without saying it. The amount of time pointing at her stretched out uncomfortably. Lupu, he exclaimed as he grasped for the first name he could think of. She fairly glowed, her high cheeks flushed red. I love it, my Moman, yeah, I love it. Her smile glowed up at him, and they resumed their walk toward the city, though Lupu had more of a spring in her step the entire way to the wall. The outermost district was more than a little rank with unwashed bodies, rotting, fetid garbage and infrequently drained sewers. They passed by numerous large empty buildings which served as barracks for soldiers and storage areas for supplies in times of war. Moman and Lupu wove their way through the grounds with ease, but Lupu could not help but let her distaste come out. I envy the fact that you can't smell this, Moman. Her nose crinkled in disgust. It really is foul. Trust me, I know. Ainz thought to himself, but answered, I can tell, even without a sense of smell. It would be easy to conclude, he said when they passed a clogged open sewer drain where bits of human and animal feces floated like boats on the toxic water. When they made it past there to the residential district, more women and children came into view. Ainz felt the familiar shock of seeing children actually running outside, so different from home. And people actually lingered to talk on street corners. Though they were dressed poorly, he saw them through different eyes. They're wealthier than the richest of Japan. They can actually go outside. No domes, no rebreathers, no filters, no poison. Unless you count the sewage smell. The reality of his own presence was enough to perk up his spirits so that he walked with a spring in his step the same as his companion, all the way to the inner district. It was a relief, the administrative center of the city as well as the main merchant district. People shouted their wares from stalls that sold fruit, vegetables, and bloody meat. Lupu's mouth watered at the sight in spite of herself. Her eyes lingered a little longer than was proper, but she carried on when her lord's long steps carried them past the merchants. Cleaner than the outer city and broken from it by a secondary inner wall, the quality of clothing changed as well, the deeper within they went. Better armored guards, better dressed people and, rather than simple tan or dark cotton cloth, rich dyes and more elaborate accessories, particularly wide hats, were the norm. However, it was Momen and Lupu who stood out. A head and a half or more taller than the average man, clad in his onyx dark armor with twin blades on his back, each one as long as a person was tall and as wide as a child's body, he was an imposing sight. Necks craned to look up at him, children stopped to point, and since there were fewer people in the interior than in the outer area, far from weaving through the crowd, people got out of his way. Dark Warrior was a phrase that reached his ear more than once. Momen chose to ignore it, but the radiant red-headed Lupu, though she didn't particularly care for the people, did enjoy the desirous looks of those who caught a glimpse of her. My creator made me more beautiful than the lot of mortals. Even I can't blame them for noticing, for that matter, that they notice is the first redeeming quality about them. She thought and folded her hands behind her head to enjoy the stroll. She pretended to ignore their looks, despite enjoying them. However, what truly made her heart sing was her fantastic luck. I owe Yuri Alpha an enormous favor. Thanks to her, I get to spend all this time with Lord Ines. They'll all be so envious. She held back her giggle of guilty pleasure, and kept the corner of her eye focused on her master and, for this role, partner. Though it must have taken some time, it felt like mere minutes to Lupu's senses when they made their way into a simple but functional large building of wood set on a stone foundation. She caught the sign as they went in, though what it was exactly was unclear to her as the lettering wasn't anything she knew. Momen put his hands on the rough, unpolished counter as soon as he approached. In front of him stood a woman with plain features and a red rainbow-shaped cap of red fabric with a white frill over the top. He's a big one, she thought to herself. Only her consummate professionalism kept her eyes from bugging out of her head when she saw not only the remarkable specimen of a towering dark warrior, but the radiant beauty of the red-headed woman with the mace dangling at her side. When he said directly in a deep, rich, noble voice, "I need to register myself and my partner as adventurers here," the receptionist couldn't smile broadly enough. "Of course, I just have to ask a few questions first," she said while pulling out a few forms. Eyes from various adventurers bored into their backs while Ines lied through his teeth to the receptionist. Much as she enjoyed seeing her master at work, paperwork bored the battle maid, and she could acutely feel the desire and attention they were getting. Stares of envy at her master, stares of desire at the contours of her body her close-fitting traveling gear revealed. Next purchase is a cloak. Not that I mind the obviously good taste humans have for beautiful maids like me, but they're just not strong enough to be good for anything but torture. Lupu let out a mental sigh to go with the thought and turned around to face the rough-looking figures. Most of them wore cheap iron or copper plates around their neck, and not one of them had a complete set of armor to their names, though they looked confident enough. More than a few had scars or shaved heads, though some had longer hair that ran down just below their necks. A wicked thought occurred and a mischievous smile formed on Lupu's face. "Pardon me, Momen, if this is going to take a while, would you mind if I had a little fun?" Lupu's mischievous grin set Momen's hairs standing on end, and for a moment he said nothing. But he could practically see the tail wagging behind her. Her pretty face looked so eager, like a pup eager to play, he couldn't help but relent. He waved toward the tables. "Don't be too rough with them, and don't play with any food." Her smile split into a laugh when she sashayed away and over to the nearest table. "You look strong," she said of the behemoth of a human who sat with a mug of beer in front of him. He grunted. "You look cute." He winked, and for a moment she couldn't help but preen at the praise of the inferior life form. "You're observant, but I'll bet I'm not just cuter, I'll bet you a beer I'm stronger too. The name is Lupu, that back there," she jabbed her thumb over her shoulder, "is Momen, the strongest man in the world." She spoke a little louder than she needed to, and the thickly muscled adventurer with the unshaved face looked her up and down. "You serious, girlie?" "Yup." Lupu drummed her fingers on the table. "Very. I'll bet you that beer." "What you got for me when I win, little pretty?" His mouth formed a lewd smile and from past his lips came an equally lewd laugh. Lupu looked away and gave a coy smile out of the side of her mouth. A story worth remembering. She then planted an elbow on the table with her arm up and fingers open. Bring it on, boyo. She mocked his earlier girly, and he slammed his elbow hard enough to rattle the table and slosh a bit of golden beer onto the wood, and put his hand in hers. 3? She asked. We do 5, here. He answered, and their loud talk, having culminated in a challenge, went from drawing just eyes, to drawing a crowd. 3, 4, 5. A bystander called. Lupus Regina didn't slam his hand down. He began grunting, straining with effort. Gah. Nia ah. He grunted and groaned, staring bug-eyed at the beauty across from him. Her arm didn't move even a hair from where it had begun. Sweat sprang to his brow. What's wrong, Yorig? Get going. I said 5 like a minute ago. Someone behind him urged. I'm trying. The beefy man, who was evidently Yorig, groaned. Lupus Regina melodramatically and mockingly brought up her other hand to her mouth and let out a yawn. Use a second hand if you want, it's fine, I don't mind. Yorick flushed, then brought his other hand up, laid it over top, and struggled to force Lupus Regina's down. Can I use a martial art? He gasped. What's a martial art? Lupu wondered to herself, but gave a little nod. Go ahead. Lesser strength, he grunted and resumed. It did no more good than the before. You can use it now. Lupus Regina encouraged him. I'm waiting. Open mouths stared in disbelief. Well, if that's all, she said with a disappointed pout to her lips, and slammed the back of his hand down on the table. She flashed a V for victory with her winning hand, snatched up the wooden mug and drank it down. Thanks. She winked at the man, who whimpered as he rubbed his bruised hand and bruised ego both at once. She slapped the mug down on the table. Don't feel too bad. I'm partnered with him, after all, and he can beat me all hollow. Lupus Regina winked. You didn't win, but you still got your prize. Awa. Was all he could manage to ask. You got to arm wrestle Lupu, partner of Moman, the strongest man in the world. Plus, pretty soon everybody will know his name, and that story ought to be worth a few free beers. She might have been teasing, but when the Dark Warrior approached, towering over her and placing an onyx-armored hand on the delicate but powerful shoulder of the victorious Lupu, Yorick couldn't help but think. I think she's right. I got to arm wrestle a legend before it became a legend. We're done here, come along, Lupu, we're going to the inn. We just need to pick up a few supplies first, Moman said, and she nodded with rapidity and obvious happiness. Of course, bye boys. She taunted them with a playful wave. That wrist will probably hurt for days if he doesn't get a healer. It's not exactly torture, but it is a start. Does that count as playing with my food though? Maybe I should ask? Lupu couldn't help but critique the possible failure to obey his orders, but ultimately decided against it. No, Lord Ines is all-knowing. If he minded, he'd have said something or wouldn't have let me do that. It's fine, she told herself, and followed him out of the building with a passive thought. The beer was barely better than water with a head on it. Hopefully somebody in this world makes something passable.